But I want you to hear this today. You have a decision to make in the interview. It's equally the candidate's decision if they want to work there. And so it's really important to weigh up, what is the culture like here? Does that culture resonate with me? Does that culture actually bring out the best in people?
Well, on Undistracted, it is a pleasure to have Shelley Johnson, one of the authors of the new book, Sort Your Career Out, with us. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me, Laura.
I think there's a lot of people, especially over the last few years, that have been thinking about doing a career reassessment. It's time for, the great resignation, the quiet quitting, all of that kind of stuff. Is that person the people that you want to be speaking to with this book, or is it really angled around a different part of the conversation?
Well, absolutely. The people who are in a moment of what I would call a career crisis, where they've gone about their career, and particularly people in a similar age group to myself, millennials, who've probably done about 10 years in their career, and they hit this point, Laura, where they're like, am I still doing what I want to be doing? Or do I enjoy this? Does this energize me? And that's something that comes up a lot for people in their career, where they get to this stage of wanting to try something new, or maybe rethinking what their future looks like in their job and work. And so for us, we wrote this book because we just see how important, Glenn and I, my co-author, how important it is to find a career that you love, and that you can build a career that gives you a sense of meaning and purpose, but doesn't overtake your whole world or destroy your soul in the process.
Yeah, I feel like that part of work is becoming increasingly more important to people, right? It's not just about how much money am I going to make from doing this, but what parts of my life, what parts of what I consider important, am I going to have to contribute or be able to contribute to this?
Totally. That's right. It's such a interesting dynamic. One of the things that so I've worked in HR for the last 10 or so years, and as a HR consultant and HR professional, I've seen a lot of people place a disproportionate weight on the job title, on the salary, on the what I would describe as the external parts of your career. Whereas what we wanted to do with this book is to show people that before you start thinking about the external elements of your career, you really need to go deep and think about, what are the drivers for you in your work and life? What are those things that are really important for your own sense of purpose? And then how do you find a career that aligns with that? And so that's a big challenge for a lot of people, because it requires you to take some time out of what you're doing and take your focus off those external things.
Yeah.
And start to look at, what is the underlying things that are important to me, for my family, for my personal life, and then how do I find a career that matches that?
Yeah, it is a really difficult thing to do, especially if you are that person who has been in a career for around, 10 years or so. Like, you've been in it long enough to get a real sense of what's going on, to drive hard at some stuff, to maybe see some changes. But then it's also kind of a short enough time that you say, hey, there's still time I could actually do something a bit different. If I want to be pursuing a different kind of career, I probably still can. With those transition windows, what is it that says, hey, this maybe is a time to transition, maybe this isn't aligning with your goals anymore, or maybe it is something you can still give your time to?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest questions in our podcast, My Millennial Career. The most common question we get asked is, should I stay or go? Should I make a big change, or should I just stick out what I'm doing? And there's a few things, like, I can't answer that question for you, but what I can do is give you some questions to reflect on your current job situation. So there's a few things I would ask. The first question is, are you growing? Are you growing? Are you learning? The second question I would ask is, are you energized? Like, do you get this sense of energy from the work that you're doing? And the last question I would ask you, if you're looking at a new opportunity, is, do you feel equally terrified and excited?
Yeah.
Because that's a good measure of, okay, well, am I feeling this sense of, oh my gosh, this is going to be a huge stretch or challenge, but also I'm excited about it. And that can help you overcome feelings of imposter syndrome. And so I encourage you, if you're in that zone of like, I don't know what to do with my career, I don't know whether to leave this job or stay, those are 3 really important reflective questions that you need to ask yourself.
Yeah, and listening to you talk about this, I feel like I need to like take a step back for a second because I go, hang on. For one thing, the ability for us to even think about, do my values suit my job? Am I going to grow, learn, develop? Like it's a very, I don't want to necessarily use the word privilege because I know there's a lot of weight to that word, but we are in a special position when we can look at our jobs through that lens of, does this satisfy my personal value set? And not only is this going to meet my, financial needs? Like, do we always need to be looking at work through that lens of values, or sometimes is it a case of, I actually just need to, pay my bills, I just got to do this job?
And that's an interesting point. I think we are most engaged and satisfied at work when we have a values match. So our workplace, our employer, and our job actually align with our values. Now, we're not always going to have that. It's not a guaranteed thing. And actually, workplaces change and evolve, and their values change just like ours do.
Mm,
So if you have a significant change in your workplace, let's say they restructure, they get a new leadership dynamic or a new culture, that may not align with your values anymore. Just like if you personally have a huge life change, like for example, for me, when I had my first baby, Sunny, she came along and all of a sudden my values changed. I used to value achievement. That was one of my things. Like I had to feel like I was achieving all this stuff. And my values changed to be one of my values changed to be autonomy. I really wanted autonomy in the work that I did. And so what that meant was I no longer had that values alignment with the job that I was doing
mm,
based on my family changing. But I still stuck that job out for a while until I felt like, okay, I'm now at the position where I can make a change. I'm now at a position where financially I've got a few things set up and I can, and there's that privilege, as you mentioned, to take a risk, to make a move. But I think the important thing in all of that is we need to do the work of actually figuring out what are our values. So for me, I had to do that deep work to go, okay, well, if I feel unsettled in my job or I've got that sense of something's not quite right here, usually that's a values clash. And
mm,
so when we can go back and do the analysis really of what is it that's not working for me, then we can work out, okay, well, is that values clash something that I'm just happy to kind of deal with and kind of suck it up? Or is this a sign that I need to start making a move? And now that move could take a little while. I'm not saying that, oh, okay, you've got a values clash, get the heck out of there.
mm.
I'm saying identify it and then work out, well, what do I want to do with that?
What work is involved in doing a values assessment? What would that look like?
Yeah, so in the book, it's actually the first chapter, we focus on values. And we walk through this activity where we've got like a list of, 200 kind of value statements. And we ask people to go through those values and work out, okay, what really resonates with me? So if I'm looking at this list of values, what words stand out to me and really say, yeah, I that's me. I agree with that. So we get people to boil it down to the top 10. What out of those 200 words, things like authenticity, autonomy, growth, financial security. What are those things that I think I need that in my life and I need that in
Mm,
my work? So you select your top 10 and then you start to narrow it down from there. And we want to get to around 4 key values. And when we can get to and boil it down to 4 key values, what I ask people to do from there is really spell out under that values statement, what does that look like in practice? So for me, one of my values is growth. And if I feel like I am not growing in a job, I get really disengaged and my performance drops and my general sense of energy depletes. And so I've tried to spell out, well, what does growth look like in practice? Well, growth looks like really healthy challenge. It looks like doing projects that get me out of my comfort zone. It looks like feeling like you are a little bit out of your depth. And so I want our listeners on My Millennial Career, our podcast, and readers of the book to do that process, because then once you've clarified and you've defined your values,
mm,
you almost have this guide or like a map of, okay, cool. Now I can assess each opportunity that comes up against that and see, okay,
mm.
well, is this new job or is the current job that I'm doing going to meet that value? And if not, then you have something to kind of help you make the right decision.
And it puts a lot of the focus of an interview, for instance, on whether or not the job you're going for fits those things, which I found to be a really unique part of this book, because normally when you're going for an interview, you're kind of going, I need a job. I hope they choose me. I hope I impress them. I hope I get the salary that I'm looking for. You're not really going in as the person sort of in power to say, does this job align with what I need it to align with? Am I going to be fulfilled in the ways I need it to? It's a whole different lens to approach that interview process by.
Oh, 100%. It's funny because it actually shifts the dynamic to being, I mean, an interview's so funny. Like, I've done so many interviews, and it's this weird artificial environment, right? Where you feel like the other person is in total power and you don't have any discretion. But I want you to hear this today. You have a decision to make in the interview. It's equally the candidate's decision if they want to work there. And so it's really important to weigh up, what is the culture like here? Does that culture resonate with me? Does that culture actually bring out the best in people? Or is it just about the dollars? Is it just about the kind of title? And are people a number here, or are people actually valued? So I want you to do that assessment in an interview. And there's some really good questions to ask, but you can ask things like, what does a high performer look like here? And if they say things that make you think a high performer looks like working 60 plus hours a week, well, if one of your values is having a decent life,
Yeah.
you're probably not going to want to work there, right? But
Mm.
I mean, if you're happy to work over 60 plus hours, that's fine, go for it. But I
Yeah.
think that thing of how do you make it more of a conversation in an interview? And those are the best interviews, when it feels like a conversation. So go in with some questions prepared that connect to your values. So for me, I mentioned growth is a value. So I would go in and ask the interviewer, what does growth and progression look like here? What opportunities do you have for internal movement? So it could be moving sideways. It doesn't have to be up a career ladder, which I could rant about the career ladder all day because I really don't like it. But I think that's a really good call out, Laura, to go into an interview with those questions and feel like you have discretion, you have influence, and ask the questions, because the last thing you want is to get into a job and realize, oh my gosh, this is the worst.
Mm.
And I should have done some more upfront research
Yeah, yeah.
to find out if it's the right place.
Yeah, and there is only so much you're going to learn in an interview, both the employer learning about you and you about them. But I do feel like it's important to point out to people that that interview window, that interview time, is just as much for them to assess you as it is for you to assess them, which I think is the part we often leave out, that we, as the person putting our hand up for this job, do need to ask questions, right? Like when it comes to that point in the interview, do you have anything you'd like to know? There should be a bunch of things.
Totally. Oh, my pet hate in interviews is when you ask the candidate, you've just asked that, peppered them with questions, like you've just done like 21 questions. And then you say, so do you have any questions for us? And they're like, no, I think you've answered all my questions. And I'm like, you literally didn't ask one single question. Like I asked you about 50 questions. I think we need to go in prepared, and I would almost go in with your questions written down on a piece of paper and go, yes, I've written them down, just in case you go blank in the interview. And you come in with those, because what that says to the interviewer is you're just as interested in working out if it's a fit. And I think it also says to them, you're not just making a decision off the whim, you've got other options, you've got other things that you're looking at. So it kind of has this thing of, it attracts them to you just as much as it's helping you make a decision about them.
Yeah, there's probably an example of maturity in it, but it's a big risk to clearly, if you're looking for work, there is a reason you're wanting it, whether it is because you found yourself out of work and you just need a job, or you're wanting to make some kind of career transition. You have skin in the game when you're going for an interview. So imagining turning it down is quite the risk, but there are some risks you say are worth taking and other risks we should avoid in the way that we approach our careers. How do you know which is a good risk and which is a bad risk?
Yeah, this is big. In the book, we talk about the 5 good risks to take and the 5 risks to avoid. I'm not going to go through them all, but I might just share 2 of the bad risks. So one of the worst risks you can take is staying too long in a toxic culture. And so that's why, going back to this idea of interviewing the employer, we need to assess what the culture's like, because if we stay in a toxic culture, it can really impact our confidence, our sense of self-worth, even leads into burnout. So there's a lot of things in a toxic environment that people really need to be aware of. So big risk is staying too long in a toxic environment. The second risk is not taking any risks. So for people who feel like right now they're in a job where they're playing it safe, or they're allowing fear to dictate their decision making, to me, that's one of the other big risks that you should not take in your career. And I know it's hard when you're in a zone of, okay, I need to figure out what I want to do next, and there's some fear and financial factors that just come into play in this space. But I would encourage you that if you're allowing fear to dictate your career decisions, that in itself is a huge risk. So start to see that of going, notice, what is it that's holding me back? What is it that's causing me to stay safe? And how might I actually be damaging my own career prospects in the future by taking this stance? And I have been really influenced by the book by Daniel Pink. It's called The Power of Regret. His research found that people regret the failures of boldness. So people regret the things that they didn't do more than the things they did do. So if you've been thinking about making a big career change, or maybe you're thinking about starting a business or moving your side hustle to be your main thing, people regret the inaction more than the action they do take. And that's what Daniel Pink's research found. And so for me, that's a real measure of, and that's something I really factor into my decisions, and for my clients, helping them factor that into their decision making, because we need to look at those big career calls through that lens of, well, at the end of my life, what am I more likely to regret? And so I think that's an important lens we need to take when we're looking at these career risks.